Hi, my name is James Patterson and welcome to this video tutorial. I'm going to show you how to create this cracked face effect we see on the girl here. If you've seen the film Black Swan, it's very similar to the effect used on the poster for that film. So using various different Photoshop techniques, we're going to try and recreate the look of this cracked face. Let's start by opening up our cracked before JPEG into Photoshop. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is to duplicate my background layer 2 times. So I can do that by, if I pick it up in the layers palette over here and drag it onto the new layer icon, or if I press Command or Control and J, that will do the same thing. I'm going to apply a texture to each of these layers, so I'm going to just rename them. We'll call the middle layer Weak Texture. And then just by double clicking on the words there, we'll call the top layer Strong Texture. There we go. Let's work on the weak texture layer. So I'll highlight that, then we'll go to Filter, Texture, Texturizer. So this brings up my texturizer dialog box, and you can see how it's applying a texture onto the skin there. We'll keep the texture as sandstone, and I'm going to use scaling at 60% and relief at 2. Also, a useful feature here, we can change the way the light falls onto the texture. So if I just zoom out here, we can mirror the way the subject here is lit. So you can see the girl's lit from the top left as the shadows are falling kind of below and to the right. So we can mirror that in the way the texture is lit by choosing light top left. So let's OK that. And then I'm going to go to my strong texture and we'll go to Filter, Texture, Texturizer again. And this time I'm going to apply the texture again, but as you've probably guessed, we're going to make it a little bit stronger. So let's bring the scaling up to 100%, and you can see that's working more strongly there over the face. Let's OK that. So now what I'm going to do is to try and mask these two layers together to create one layer where we have some stronger texture showing through in parts of the camera, such as the face and the arms here that's closer to the camera. So I'm going to do that using layer masks. So if I hold Alt and click on my Add Layer Mask icon here, this will give me a full layer mask which is hiding all of the information on that strong texture layer. So then I can paint with white. So if I grab my brush tool over in the toolbox over here, and if I set my foreground color to white, I can paint to reveal parts of that layer. I'm just going to use my bracket keys, left or right, to make my brush size larger or smaller. And I'm going to paint over the face here and the forearms to reveal the stronger texture in these areas. You don't need to be too precise about this. It's quite a subtle effect, but it really adds to the depth of the image. So let's have a look how that's working. If I zoom in a little bit closer, we can see. So if I toggle that layer on and off, you can see how that stronger texture is working over these parts here, with the weaker texture working on the background here. Maybe if I just mask a little bit of black in here, if I'm painting back with the black to hide parts of my strong texture layer. So I'm quite happy with that. I'm going to now press Command or Control and E, which will merge that texture to the layer below it. So now we have one layer with all of the texture working on it. So I'm going to rename that as simply texture. Okay. Also, I can see that some of the texture is intruding on parts of the image where we really don't want it, such as the background here and the hair. So I'm going to again mask that out using another layer mask. This time I'm going to just click on the layer mask icon without holding Alt, and that will give me an empty layer mask. And then if I use my black brush, let's just select black and my brush tool, and then I can paint with black to hide that texture in these areas, such as the background here where we don't want it, and also over the parts of the hair here, just like this. So that's working fairly well. I'm going to then lower the opacity of my brush just by going up to the slider up the top of the screen here. Let's bring it down to around 50%, and then I'm just going to work over the eyes just with a couple of brush strokes just to soften the texture around these areas, so just to allow a bit more of the detail to show through. Again, it's quite a subtle effect, but it really adds to the image. So let's just mask the texture there as well. That looks fairly good to me. I'm going to press Command or Control and E again. Actually, let's first of all duplicate my background layer so we have another layer that we can merge my texture layer into. Then if I press Command or Control and E, that will merge all my texture into one layer again. Let's rename that one texture just to save any confusion. Okay, so next I'm going to apply a couple of different adjustments to my texture layer to alter the color and the tone of the image. Let's go to Image Adjustments and Hue Saturation. I'm going to knock my saturation back to about -30. You can see how that's sucking some of the life out of the girl. Let's OK that. And then I'm going to go again to Image Adjustments and let's choose Color Balance, and I'm going to move my cyan slider to around -20 here, look, just to add a little bit of cyan into the image. The good thing about adding cyan to a portrait, it means you can bump up the contrast without the skin looking too radioactive, so it's quite useful in that sense. I'm going to go to Image Adjustments and Curves this time, and if I just draw an S-shaped curve like this, you can see how that's giving me more contrast. Something like that looks good. We don't want too much contrast. Okay. So the next step is to begin drawing some cracks, and we're going to draw each crack on a separate layer. So let's start by creating a new layer with the new layer icon in the layers palette, and if I click on that, we'll call that layer Face Crack 1. So we're going to be drawing the cracks using the brush tool, and so you can select that in the toolbar to the left of the screen, or press B for your shortcut. Let's zoom into the face here. So we're going to actually be drawing the shape of the crack. You can do that if you like freehand, like this. That's obviously very rough. Or if you want to be lazy like me, you can load in a set of brushes that will do much of the work for you. So let's go ahead and undo that. Then I'm going to go up to my brush preset picker at the top of the screen here. And if I click on this icon in the corner here, this will bring this drop down menu, and I can go to load brushes, and here are my crack brushes here. Let's load them in. So you can see the brushes have appeared at the bottom of my brush preset picker here. Let's select one with a nice line like this one here, and I'm just going to start drawing the shape of the crack. So let's just click once to start the line there. Let's choose a different shape maybe. Let's go for this one. So I want to continue the line. Obviously my brush here is kind of at the wrong angle, so to adjust the characteristics of the brush, I can click on this icon here. This will toggle my brush palette on and off, and I'm interested in using this circular icon here to alter the angle of my brush. So let's get it a little bit more vertical, something like that, and let's adjust the slider again, maybe move it a little bit more. Something like that looks good to me. And then maybe we'll choose a different shape. Let's go for this one here. Again, let's alter the angle like this. Something like that looks good to me. And let's just choose one more brush shape. Let's go for this one here. Okay, well, that looks pretty good to me. The next step is to fill in this area of skin to create a solid shape that we can then turn into a selection. So let's go back to my layers, and I'm going to go back and choose a simple circular brush, and if I just zoom in and move up a little bit, so I'm going to begin painting along this line here. I want to fill in this whole area here, look. So you have to be fairly precise about this, so we make sure we've got the exact shape that we're after. Let's zoom out slightly. So I'm going to do a little bit of a rush job just to speed on through a little bit. So the good thing about this tutorial is there are quite a few similar techniques you can do that have been done in tutorials before that simply apply a texture layer above your image with some cracks on the texture layer, and then you can merge the two using blend modes. You can get some very interesting results doing that method. This method is a little bit different in that the shapes that we're making, we can then create layers from the original image and to make the cracks ourselves, so that the cracks are actually interacting with the image a little bit more. So I think we are done there. That looks pretty good to me. So next we want to load a selection of this shape that we've just created. To do that, we just need to hold Command or Control and click on the layer thumbnail here. This will give us a selection of that shape. So now I can hide that layer, and if we go back to our texture layer, I'm going to press Command or Control and J, which will give me a new layer. Let's do it 2 times, so Command and Control and J again. And so now we've got 2 different layers above our texture layer. Let's rename these. I'm going to call this one Surface, and I'll call this one Inner. And then now I'm going to create an illusion of depth to these 2 layers by using different blend modes and layer styles. So let's start by changing the blend mode of this inner layer to multiply. Let's go up to the blend modes up here and we'll choose multiply. Let's turn that surface layer off so you can see how that multiply effect is darkening that inner layer. Then I'm going to add a layer style to my inner layer. Let's go to inner shadow, and this will bring up my layer style dialog box. I'm going to move my angle around here to around about 130. Let's just type in 130 there. So this, similar to the texturizer box, I can also adjust the way light falls and creates the shadows. So we're going to mirror the way the light's falling on the subject again by making the light come from the top left to the shadow. I'm going to move my opacity down slightly to around 65, and then let's set distance at 3 and size at 2. Let's OK that. I'm going to hide this surface layer again, so you can see in these areas here we're starting to get a little bit more depth to the shape with some shadow applied. Let's go to the surface layer, and to this layer I'm going to apply another layer style. Let's click on the add layer style icon. This time we'll choose a drop shadow, and I'm going to use the similar settings. So let's move this down to 65 again and keep the angle at 130, and then let's use distance 2 and size 2. Let's OK that. And then if I grab my move tool over here, and you need to make sure you have auto select and show transform controls, both of those checked, then you can see when I begin to move this layer around, if I just pick up this surface layer and drag it around, you can see how that's working and giving me the illusion that part of the face is kind of falling away. So that looks pretty good to me. You can also adjust the shape of this layer in various ways. If you, while you're in transform mode, so you'll have these icons appear like the little arrows here when you're in transform mode. If you right click and then you can go to warp and have a play around with the shape just by clicking and dragging in various places, you can alter the size and the shape of your layer to make it look however you like. So let's try and just make it look like it's falling away a little bit more. Maybe something like that looks pretty good to me. Let's hit enter and apply that. Okay. Next I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer here. And if I move maybe down to the lips here. So what I want to do now is to use my clone tool to clone in some little bits of debris in between these gaps here. So if I grab my clone tool over in the toolbox over here, let's go clone stamp tool. I'm just going to get quite a small brush, And then if I hold Alt, I can select my source for the brush. So let's just choose an area similar to the area we're cloning into. So maybe just around the lips here. And then if I begin to paint like this, you can see how I can start to build up some little different bits of debris here. Let's clone from the lip here like this. Let's select a source nearby, just like this look. So again, I'm being quite rough about this. You can be a bit more precise if you like. You can see how that's beginning to work. Also, maybe where the crack is ending at the chin here, if I just select a source from up here, then I can paint in some little bits of debris that kind of look like they're falling down, which also adds to the effect. Let's continue up here. We'll just draw a few more different bits in. Something like this looks good. And then I'll continue up here with a few more. So I'm using a tablet here, which really helps when you're making kind of fine brush strokes right like this. You can get great results with the mouse. It would just take you slightly longer. Okay, so I'm fairly happy with that. If I zoom out, you can see how that effect's working around there. So now I just need to draw a few finer cracks just to add a little bit of detail to this larger crack I've drawn. So I'm going to start by adding a new layer. Let's call it finer crack shapes. And then I'm going to go back to my brush tool, and let's go back to my brush palette as well. Let's just select a different shaped brush, and I'm going to just draw a few little cracks like this in these areas here. So let's choose another brush shape. So again, I'm being fairly quick about this. Okay, maybe add another line there. Let's choose a different shape, something like this one. And then if we move down a little bit, maybe draw a couple of lines over the lips here like this. Maybe let's choose that one there again. And maybe one more, just like that. So that looks pretty good to me. Now I'm going to go back to my layers, and if I hold Command and Control and click on that finer crack shapes layer, this will give me a selection of those shapes, and then I can go back to my texture layer, and if I press Command and Control and J again, this will duplicate that selection to a new layer, which I'm going to then call finer cracks. If I turn off my finer crack shapes layer and then go to my finer cracks layer and change the blend mode of that to multiply, you can see that's adding a little bit of detail to the cracks, but still allowing some of the background detail to show through. We can always, if we want to increase the effect, if we bring up our curves, Command or Control and M, and then maybe drag the curve down slightly to darken that layer. Let's OK that. So there we have it. That's my first crack pretty much complete. For the next stage, we need to draw a few more cracks. So I'm going to do them in exactly the same way. Before we do so, I'm just very quickly going to run through my layers palette here to show you what we've got done so far. So we've got our face crack layer that we've hidden, that we drew to turn into a selection. And then we have our finer crack shapes that we've also hidden. Then we have our surface layer, which we've added a few bits of debris to with the clone tool. Then if I turn that off, we have our inner layer, which is the multiplied blend mode layer underneath. And you can toggle that on and off to see how that's working. And then we have our finer cracks working just to give a little bit more detail. So all three layers together creates a very interesting effect that you can apply to pretty much any surface you like, really. It doesn't have to be a face or a person. So I'm just going to fast forwards a little bit and go to Bridge and show you a version of the same image where I've added a few more different shapes. So let's open up this second image here, and you can see where I've painted in different shapes in exactly the same way as we just painted in the face. So if I toggle them on and off, you can see the effect working underneath. Let's turn that hand off there. And I'm just going to show you, run through the effect again very quickly with this shape on the shoulder here, so you can see where the skin is underneath. I'm just going to press Command and Control and click on that layer thumbnail to give me a selection. Let's then hide that layer. We'll go back to our texture layer, press Command and Control and J 2 times, and then let's work on the first copy. We'll change the blend mode of that to multiply, and then we will add an inner shadow effect, working with opacity around about 65. Let's move these to about 2 and 2, maybe 3 and 2. Let's OK that, and then we'll go to our second copy and let's add a layer style to that layer. Let's call this one drop shadow and bring this one to about 2 and 2 again. Let's OK that, and then you can see if I move that layer around, then using my move tool I can apply exactly the same technique. Let's make it fall away slightly, then we'll grab the clone tool and quickly, I'll zoom in a little bit closer, hold Alt and select a source, and then paint a few different bits of debris in the gap here, just like this. Maybe we can also add a few little bits of falling debris like this. That looks pretty good to me. Let's draw a few more bits up here. Okay, and there we have it. So continuing in the same vein, you can make as many cracks as you like. I'm going to go back to Bridge and show you another version where I've taken the effect even further. So I'm going to finish off by just showing you this image here where I've taken the effect a little bit further. I've grouped all of my shape layers that I've painted on into one. You can see I've painted a few in different colours here. The colour doesn't really matter. All that matters is the shape of the crack that you're painting. So let's toggle those off and I'll show you how that's working underneath. So you can see you get this really interesting effect, and you can take it as far as you want to. So thank you very much for watching this video tutorial, and I do hope you have a go yourself.